This is an Allosaurus skull, and I made this one from scratch for less than 10 bucks worth of materials. And I used a technique that'll allow you to take any 3D model and bring it into reality without a 3D printer. And the whole project came about because I've always wanted a dinosaur skull. And one day an idea of how to replicate one came to mind, and I couldn't shake the idea until I started making it to see if it would work. But it was so time-consuming and I made so many mistakes that I nearly gave up. So to give myself the push I needed, I started filming myself so that I could share the experience with you. And fortunately, I did end up crawling through this so that maybe you can run. All right, let me get us caught up to the point where I started filming. I started by finding a model of an Allosaurus skull and I brought that into Fusion 360. And then I essentially ran it through one of those boiled egg slicers, and I made sure that each slice was the same thickness as the insulation foam that I was going to be using to construct the model, which was 1/2 inch. And then in Fusion, I made a 1 inch by 1 inch grid, and I laid each slice on that grid. After that, I just took a screenshot of each slice and I printed that out. Using a ruler, I made that same 1 inch by 1 inch grid on my insulation foam. Then I just copied what I saw on the screenshots to the insulation foam, making sure to use the grid to keep things accurate. I also traced out where the layers are going to sit on top of each other so that I knew where to apply the glue when assembling it later. Once the layers are cut out, you just need to glue them together. And to do this I used hot glue, but in hindsight I wish I had used something different. And this is because hot glue just doesn't sand down the same as the insulation foam, and so you're left with these ridges that are difficult to get rid of. I tried to use Super 77 and a few other adhesives, but most of them end up eating into the foam, so if you have an idea on how to get around that, let me know. Once those layers are glued together, there's a bit of stair-stepping that needs to be smoothed out. For this, I just used a wood rasp and some heavy sandpaper. I also took this opportunity to do a little bit of detail work, but the surface of the foam can be kinda crumbly, so I saved the majority of this until after the next step. Alright, cool. Now we're caught up to the point where I started filming. At this point, I just wanted to make the foam structure tougher. One of the ways I thought to do this was with drywall spackle. And I had some of that on hand, so you can imagine what I ended up using. I initially tried applying this with a drywall knife, as you do, but this was such a struggle. Soon I found out it was way easier just going slappers only. Here's where we are after one coat of drywall spackle. It definitely helps to unify the skull all as one shape. Unfortunately, it's also helped to illuminate any cracks that may have formed or areas where the glue is delaminating. It's made the surface tougher and more ready to receive detail. It's also given it a little bit of texture. You can pick this up if you have a texture indicator and it's calibrated. Now I can go in with some needle files and start refining the details. The goal here is to give the sculpt some more dimension and sharpen up some of the features that got smoothed out by the spackle. I'm also adding some general wear and tear to the model. I started by accentuating the cracks that occurred when I was just roughing out the initial shape. I really had to release my inner perfectionist and embrace the happy little accidents, as it were.
Anytime you make a mistake, before you get upset with it, look at it.
This thing was supposedly underground for millions of years anyway, right? On the table there, you can see some images that I was using for reference. What I didn't realize at the time was that the model I was using was pretty inaccurate. Basically, all the bones are just a little too thick. So the model that I've linked in the description is far more accurate, at least to my knowledge. Everything's a little bit thinner and the cavities inside the skull are larger. Once I was satisfied enough with that, I could move on to making some teeth. The material I'm using for these is just Sculpey, but I feel like any clay that hardens would do the business here. At this point I wasn't 100% sure how I was going to attach the teeth, so I just gave myself a little nub to glue on. What I'm doing here is making a little tool to give the teeth some texture. I did this by pouring some UV resin into some crumpled up aluminum foil and then allowing that to cure. I also made a little waste of time here that holds my flashlight for me. The result is the only sucker in the world that would be worse than the ones they gave you when your mom took you to the bank. It does look better though if you press harder than what I've indicated here. Then after giving them all a once over with the texture tool, I just needed to let them bake for a little bit. When they came out of the oven, they were firmer, but they tasted a little bit overdone, and they were kind of fragile. Just kidding, they're actually the strongest things ever made, and they tasted just fine. This is a 2.5 pound wedge hammer, and it's just doing more splash damage to everything on the table than it is to the teeth. Like the tripod legs are getting shorter every time I whack on the table. God, I was inches away from disaster with that hammer. Once I had persuaded all the little pieces apart, I could immediately undo everything by gluing it all back together, just so it looks broken and repaired. Now I'm just going through each and every tooth and giving it its own unique set of scars or battle damage that occurred during Dino Battle. Dinosaurs Battle. And I mean, look at this. Each serration lovingly attended to. This is the sight of a man who has lost the plot. He's lost sight of the end goal. After all that hard work, I'm left with something that looks like this. It's not at all accurate to a real dinosaur tooth, it's more like a tribute. And that's just because it's a little too skinny and it doesn't attach to the skull in the same way as a real dinosaur's tooth. Also, this is sculpy. Now this whole time I had an idea of how I wanted the teeth to attach, but I wasn't sure if it was gonna work. The teeth need somewhere to attach, so I grabbed a drill bit that was roughly the same size as that little nubbin that I left myself when I was making them. Then I sort of just twisted that in by hand. I didn't really trust an electric drill not to completely mangle the whole thing because it's just soft foam after all. Just to make sure the tooth is a snug fit, I'm using this bamboo barbecue skewer to kind of taper the hole so that it grabs tighter at the top. Almost surprisingly, that's exactly how that went down. Everything fits perfectly and it's nice and snug in there. It's not going anywhere. After I gave myself a really nice pat on the back, I continued installing the rest of the teeth. The sense of accomplishment that I felt was so short-lived, because I'm about to realize that all of these teeth that I'm installing are just way too big for the skull that I've made. And so all of the loving work that I've put into each serration of these, I get to do it all over again. We get to remake, rebake, reshape, re-break, repair, resharpen, and then replace every single tooth. Obviously that whole process was kind of painful, but after all the teeth were in place, even though they weren't glued in yet, you could really start to see that the project was coming together, and I actually started to get excited again. Before I could glue all this in place though, I needed to give the teeth some paint, so I decided that was the next step. Okay, painting. Now for this next step I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, and if for some reason you doubt that, I will clear it up for you here shortly. Here I'm mixing up some dark brown paint that's gonna go into the airbrush, but this is only about my second time using the airbrush, and the only tutorialization that I've had on it is the book that came with it, and I don't think that was the best instructions. Like for reference, a good air compressor setting for the average airbrush is around 15 to 20 psi, and you wouldn't really want to go above 30. I only learned that after filming, so mine is set to about 40 psi. So, the proper solution to this would obviously just be turn the air pressure down, which would have been nice to know because that is not what I did. Instead, I just taped everything down. This worked, but it caused blank spots where the teeth were sitting on the tape. Here's some examples of the look that I'm going for. The enamel of the tooth has darkened, and where there's damage to it, you can see into a lighter substructure inside the tooth. I'm sure it all has names, I don't know what they are. Regardless of the technique used, they did end up with some paint on them, so I moved on to the next step. This next layer was meant to be a dry brushing, but it looks like I have a soaking wet foam brush. It just goes to show that it really doesn't matter how suboptimal your approach is. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And with that in mind, I'm calling this good. Alright, back to skull stuff. All the carving that I did previously had worked through that top layer of spackle, and so before continuing, I had to go through and give the whole thing another coat. When I was applying this layer, I made sure to leave the surface extra rough because I felt like it really added to that bony appearance. I think that's looking pretty bony already, but to add to the bonification, I'm going to take a welding wire brush and a brass wire brush, and I'm just going to go through and tap on all of the areas that stick out. And the goal here is to mimic what I've seen with some other fossils where the top layer of the bone, the outside of the bone, gets eroded away so that you can see into this sort of foamy inner structure that's in the bones. And what I've seen just from my own very limited experience is that this tends to happen on all of the areas that kind of protrude out, or all of the bone processes. I think I lost my restraint with the tapping and just went full Happy Gilmore.
Give it a little tapping.
But afterwards, I'm left with a surface that looks like it came out of the ground and it's ready for paint. Now that we're painting again, you would hope that I had turned down the air pressure on the compressor. But I haven't. I'm still pegged right at 40 psi, painting with the equivalent of a Falcon 9 rocket. It does work to put down paint though, I'll give it that. After this first coat of paint, I really wasn't liking the surface that was coming out. It was just too rough. So off camera, I went through with yet some more drywall spackle and filled in the holes that I didn't like. Then obviously that needs another coat of paint.
Anyway, I started blasting. Bah, bah.
I wanted to make sure everything was nice and covered with acrylic paint, because my plan for the next step was to go back with some clear coat and lock in that base color. Unfortunately, that is not how things went down. All of that tapping that I did with the wire brush gave the clear coat an entry point to reach in and touch the foam and then just eat it away. And so sometimes the foam that it ate away was even beneath a coat of paint, which made it look less natural. And so the result was the whole thing looked absolutely zombified. And at first I was pretty upset. Then I remembered to just embrace the happy accidents.
Look at it.
And by embrace them, I mean cover them up with, do I even have to say it at this point? Look, when your only tool is a hammer, every problem is a nail, you know what I mean? Now that all those holes are filled in, they don't match the rest of the skull. So ironically enough, I have to go back with the very tool that created the problem to solve the problem and bring it in to match the rest of the texture. Then obviously I had to repaint yet again to hide my sins. And you know, every time I do this, I have to remix the paint and color match it to what I've done previously, because I never planned to make mistakes. I mean, a plan to fail that's a bad plan. Don't plan like that. What's that phrase? Whatever. Here's where we are at the moment. I've got the whole thing covered in another coat of tan acrylic paint, and then I hit the whole thing in another coat of clear. I think initially I wanted the whole thing to be this tannish bony color, and then I was just going to weather it on top of that, but ultimately I decided that I didn't like that and I went way darker. This way it's much more in line with the color of the teeth, but it's also more in line with the color of museum pieces and fossils that I've seen in references. While we watch this footage of what looks like a giant dinosaur-shaped marshmallow being roasted by a tiny blowtorch, I want to take a second to say thank you so much for watching this far into the video. I have never filmed myself before filming this, and I've never edited a video. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I kind of like doing it, and I would like doing it some more. So if you would like seeing it some more, subscribe, like, do those things. I will be obsessively refreshing, waiting for any update, so please make me happy. Okay, thank you. Alright, our marshmallow's looking nice and toasty, and I think we can finally stop abusing that poor airbrush and move on to doing some washes. For this, I've thinned out some dark brown paint, and I'm applying that really liberally before going back and removing most of it from the surface. And the goal here is to have that thin paint creep into the cracks and crannies of the surface before trying to remove it from the top, and this will give it the appearance of some extra depth. Or at least that was the goal. This is one of those times where I just had to trust the process, because I had never worked with washes before, and I didn't have like a test area I could try this out on, and these weren't even real washes. But just like everything else in the project, I just keep getting away with it. Here we are after the washes, and I have the teeth wedged back in there. And I thought I was starting to look convincing. I mean, you tell me. But I thought it was convincing enough to at least start gluing the teeth in. I used hot glue for the teeth because, I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But can I just say how annoying those little hot glue stringies are? And if you miss one, it makes the whole affair look like a school project. Anyway, holy cow, we're almost done. I just need a way to display this without just setting it on a table. So I'm going to make a stand for it. And to do this, obviously, I start by drilling a hole roughly in the center of gravity where the skull is going to sit on the stand. And then off camera, I hammered a little strip of metal into a tube, and right now I'm gluing that tube into where the stand is going to set. Oh. And by that I mean I rammed it through the top. Maybe I can put it back. There were a few other areas that needed fixing anyway, so I got those patched up, and I also reinforced the area where the stand is going to sit, because obviously it was not very strong. Unfortunately, all of the repairs that I did are stark white, so they need to be blended in. To do this, I'm just using a cheap brush and the airbrush paints that I actually do have extra of. And the process is pretty forgiving because it's not like trying to touch up car paint or something where the repairs have to be invisible. The whole surface is pretty rough and weathered, so this was easy. For the base of the stand, I'm just using a rock. I've already drilled a hole roughly the size that we need, and I've flattened the bottom with a chisel so that it could sit nicely without rocking around. Without rocking around, it's a rock. Lastly, we just need to glue this metal rod in place. This was supposed to be part of a paper towel holder for a pegboard that I got, but I didn't need a paper towel holder, I needed a dinosaur holder. I did say that I drilled that hole roughly the right size, so to make up the difference I just used some UV resin with a spirit level to make sure everything was nice and straight. So here we are with the end result. I'm going to be honest with you, the whole project was a little bit tedious, but I'm pretty pleased with how it turned out. I might try to scale this up in the future, or maybe even give this guy a lower jaw to just kind of complete the ensemble. Another idea I had is that you could completely change how this is finished. You know, you could go neon colors or florals, gold leaf, riveted metal, anything. Even though the process was a bit daunting, I did learn a ton of new skills that I can apply to all the different projects that I do. And if you have something that you want me to try, let me know, because I'm open to suggestions. All right, that's it for now. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.